On this video, we're exploring the history behind the Bram Stoker's Dracula video games that were released from 1993 to 1995. There are multiple versions of this game, and we're going through the majority of those, hopefully finding out if any are worth playing and taking a quick glance at all the companies that were involved. All this on the story of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the video game. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date on my latest videos. Let's get started. Bram Stoker's Dracula is an 1897 gothic horror novel by Irish author Bram Stoker. The story is about Dracula's efforts to spread the vampire curse and his battle with Van Helsing as he attempts to move from Transylvania to England. In 1992, a film would release with the same name, directed and produced by Francis Ford Coppola, previously known for the Godfather trilogy. It starred Gary Oldman as Count Dracula and Keanu Reeves as the protagonist Jonathan Harker. Despite mediocre reviews from critics and moviegoers, the film was still a success and grossed $82 million in the United States alone and won multiple awards. The success paved the way for multiple video game adaptations released between 1993 and 1995. The movie was distributed by Columbia Pictures, who was owned by Sony Electronics. Sony Electronics owned a video game publishing company called Sony ImageSoft. They would handle the publishing for all Bram Stoker's video games and bring on developer Psygnosis, a company headquartered in Liverpool, England and known for the hit game Lemmings. Psygnosis would bring in developers Traveller's Tales and Probe Software, which was later renamed to Probe Entertainment. Traveller's Tales was a rather new company with only one game under their belt called Leander, released in 1991, and the other developer, Probe Entertainment, had been in business for almost a decade and had already developed multiple games. So it's safe to say there was definitely talent behind the creation of the Dracula video games. The first version of the game was a side-scrolling platform game released for the Game Boy, Game Gear, Nintendo Entertainment System, and the Sega Master System. The stages in the game are identical, but what differs is the difficulty. In the NES version, the bosses have way too many hit points, making for a frustrating experience. On the other platforms, the bosses are much easier and have way less hit points. The rest of the bosses in the game range from bosses that can't even be hit to bosses that are just basic dodge and slash. There is no varying gameplay, and with the repeating bosses, it quickly becomes very repetitive. The highlight of the game though is the music. I personally find it to be very creepy, and it definitely lifted my experience with the game. The second version of the game was also a side-scrolling game released for the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. Both of these versions are almost visually identical. Where they differ is the difficulty. The Super Nintendo version is much harder earlier on, and the Sega Genesis version finishes much harder. Also, the Sega Genesis version has way less enemies attacking the player, giving it a much more creepier feel. Whereas the Super Nintendo enemies appear to have more hit points and make the game very frustrating. The bosses are decent in each version, and like the first version of the game, the music is really good. Each version has its pros and cons, but I prefer the Sega Genesis version due to the creepier feel, the slightly better music, and easier enemies. The third version of the game was released for the Sega CD in 1993. This version uses digitized backgrounds and full motion video cutscenes from the film, and these cutscenes are grainier than modern day UFO videos. The game uses a style very similar to Batman Forever on the Super Nintendo. It didn't work there, and you'll see it doesn't work here either. Your objective is to kick and punch your way to the end of each level where you're met with a cutscene from the film. If I had played this in 1993 as a kid, I might have enjoyed it way more. but playing it today makes for a very grueling experience and one of the slowest paced games I've ever played. Top that with horrible controls and laughable combat, and you have the worst version out of all of these games. The fourth version of the game was released for the Amiga in 1994. For this version, they would recycle the graphics from the Sega CD version, but would change the game's design. Instead of side-scrolling linear stages, they would use more of an adventure style, where the player must find keys to open doors and destroy all the coffins. The combat is just as bad as the Sega CD version, but the gameplay is definitely a lot more fun. It's not the best version, and it's certainly not the worst. The last version to release in 1995 was the MS-DOS version. The game is played in a first-person perspective similar to Doom, where the player, equipped with a knife and gun, must destroy all the coffins in the stage with holy water. If you love early-day PC games, you might enjoy this, but it didn't age well and is a little tough to play. The Sega CD and DOS versions would get panned by critics. Electronic Gaming Monthly would give the Sega CD version a 5.25 out of 10. Saying the main character's movements are choppy, the battling with birds and bats is unimpressive and dull, and the full motion video sequences are so pixelated and blurry that it's difficult to even make out what's going on. As for the DOS version, Computer Gaming World stated, it appears Psygnosis spent most of their Dracula budget on acquiring the movie license, leaving little for the game development and packaging. That's all the versions of Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's really interesting to see how the joint collaboration between 4 companies produced such different games for the same movie. So where are these companies now? Well, Sony ImageSoft and Psygnosis are now both part of Sony Computer Entertainment. Probe Entertainment was purchased by Acclaim in 1994 for a rumored $40 million. And Traveler's Tales is still around and has become very well known for the LEGO series. Developing all the different versions was a huge undertaking, and considering how decent some of these games are, I think they did pretty well. The Sega Genesis version is definitely my favorite, followed closely by the Super Nintendo version. The worst version in my opinion is the Sega CD, followed by the MS-DOS version, or maybe even the Amiga version. But again, those are just my opinion. Which one do you enjoy playing, or maybe you don't like any of them? Let me know in the comment section below. If you liked the video, make sure to subscribe and don't forget to click the notification bell to keep up to date on my latest videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Rod here with Zivivi Entertainment. Before I get out of here, make sure to check out Digital Break for some awesome content creators. Digital Break is a 1-hour block on local TV that premiered in April. They are taking talented YouTube creators and airing their content on local TV. So make sure to follow and like their Facebook page. Thanks everyone, I'm out.